Neuroplasticity, often described as the brain's remarkable ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life, is a cornerstone concept in modern neuroscience. It challenges the long-held belief that the brain's structure and functions are largely fixed after early childhood. Instead, accumulating research has revealed that our brains remain dynamic and adaptable well into adulthood and even old age, capable of change in response to learning, experience, environment, and injury. This adaptability not only underpins the mechanisms of learning and memory, but also offers profound insights into rehabilitation strategies following neurological damage, as well as potential interventions for psychiatric disorders and cognitive decline. At its core, neuroplasticity operates at multiple levels of brain organization. On the cellular level, it involves synaptic plasticity, the strengthening or weakening of synapses based on patterns of activity. Hebbian theory, which famously states neurons that wire together, provides the foundational understanding of how repeated activation of certain neural circuits leads to more robust and efficient signaling pathways. Long-term potentiation, HALT, and long-term depression, LOD, are physiological processes that embody this synaptic strengthening and weakening, respectively. These mechanisms are not static, but are continuously modulated by both intrinsic factors, like genetics, and extrinsic factors, such as environmental stimuli and behavioral experiences. One of the most striking demonstrations of neuroplasticity is seen in the somatosensory and motor cortices. Studies involving monkeys and humans have shown that the cortical representation of body parts can expand or contract depending on use. For example, in violinists, the region of the brain corresponding to the fingers of the left hand, the hand used to finger the strings, shows an enlarged cortical map compared to non-musicians. Similarly, when a limb is amputated, the brain regions that once processed input from that limb can be taken over by neighboring regions, a phenomenon sometimes associated with phantom limb sensation. These findings underscore the brain's capacity to reorganize its functional map in response to altered sensory input or motor demand. Neuroplasticity also plays a crucial role in recovery after brain injuries, such as strokes or traumatic brain injuries. In the acute phase following injury, inflammation and neural damage disrupt existing pathways, but over time, with the right therapeutic stimuli, other parts of the brain can often compensate for lost function. Constraint-induced movement therapy, for instance, has shown promise in encouraging patients to use their affected limbs, thereby driving cortical reorganization and improving motor outcome. These rehabilitative processes leverage experience, dependent plasticity, where repetition, intensity, and task-specific practice promote synaptic and structural changes. On cognitive level, neuroplasticity underpins the process of learning and memory. The hippocampus, a brain structure intimately involved in the consolidation of new memories, is a site of particularly dynamic plasticity. Not only are synapses remodeled in this region during learning, but neurogenesis, the generation of new neurons, also occurs, especially in response to enriched environments, physical activity, and certain pharmacological agents. Although the extent and significance of adult neurogenesis in humans are still debated, animal studies have firmly established its existence and relevance for cognitive flexibility and resilience against stress and depression. emotionally and psychologically. Neuroplasticity offers a compelling framework for understanding how therapeutic interventions, including cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness meditation, and even pharmacological treatments, can lead to lasting changes in brain structure and function. Functional imaging studies have demonstrated that can normalize activity in the prefrontal cortex and amygdala, regions implicated in mood and anxiety disorders, reflecting the brain's adaptive potential to recalibrate dysfunctional circuits. Meditation practices, particularly those emphasizing focused attention and compassion, have been associated with increased cortical thickness in areas involved in attention regulation and emotional processing, further supporting changes. Despite its many benefits, neuroplasticity is not inherently positive. Maladaptive plasticity can also occur, where the brain's adaptability leads to dysfunctional patterns. Chronic pain, tinnitus, and certain anxiety disorders are thought to involve aberrant plastic changes, such as hyperactivity in sensory or fear-related circuits. In such cases, the same mechanisms that enable learning and recovery can reinforce pathological states, highlighting the importance of guided, purposeful engagement with neuroplastic processes in therapeutic settings. Age is another dimension that modulates neuroplasticity. While plasticity tends to be more robust in children, enabling rapid learning and recovery from injuries, adult brains retain significant, but somewhat more constrained, adaptive potential. Factors that influence plasticity across the lifespan include genetic predispositions, hormonal changes, lifestyle factors like physical exercise, cognitive and diet. The aging brain may require more intense or novel stimuli to induce plastic changes, but it remains capable of forming new connections and adapting to new challenges, refuting the deterministic view of cognitive decline as an inevitable consequence of aging. Recent advances in neuroimaging and electrophysiology have deepened our understanding of the dynamics of neuroplasticity. Techniques such as functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, transcranial magnetic stimulation, TEMS, and electroencephalography have provided real-time insights into how the brain reorganizes in response to external stimuli or internal goals. These tools have not only enhanced our capacity to diagnose and monitor neurological conditions, but also opened new frontiers for personalized interventions based on an individual's unique neural architecture and plastic potential. Moreover, cutting-edge research into brain-computer interfaces, neuroprosthetics, and optogenetics is beginning to harness the principles of neuroplasticity for practical application. By decoding neural signals and delivering targeted stimulation, these technologies aim to facilitate learning, restore lost function, or even modulate behavior. Although still in early stages, such interventions point toward a future where deliberate modulation of neuroplasticity could become a routine aspect of medical and psychological care. In conclusion, neuroplasticity is a dynamic and multifaceted process that embodies the brain's remarkable capacity for change. It lies at the heart of learning, memory, adaptation, and recovery, offering hope and tangible solutions for a wide array of neurological and psychological conditions. As our understanding of its mechanisms continues to evolve, so too does our ability to harness its potential, making neuroplasticity not just a concept of scientific interest, but a practical tool for enhancing human health and well-being across the lifespan. Multisensory integration refers to the process by which the brain combines information from multiple sensory modalities, such as vision, hearing, touch, taste, and smell, to create a coherent and unified perceptual experience. This capability is fundamental not only for accurate perception of the environment, but also for effective interaction with it. The human brain, through intricate neural networks, is capable of synthesizing inputs from disparate sensory channels in a manner that enhances detection, discrimination, and reaction to external stimuli. While the study of individual sensory systems has a rich history, the burgeoning field of multisensory research underscores that perception is not simply the sum of its sensory parts, but a synergistic phenomenon guided by both spatial and temporal rules. Multisensory integration operates under several well-established principles. One of the most foundational is the principle of spatial and temporal coincidence. The likelihood that two or more sensory signals will be integrated is highest when they originate from the same location in space and occur close together in time. For instance, when watching someone speak, visual information from their lip movements and auditory information from their voice typically occur simultaneously and in spatial alignment, leading to a unified perception of speech. The famous McGurk effect demonstrates how this integration can even lead to perceptual illusions, where a discrepancy between auditory and visual cues can cause the listener to perceive a third, entirely different sound. Such phenomena illustrate that multisensory integration is not merely additive, but involves complex computational processes where the brain resolves discrepancies and weighs sensory inputs based on context and reliability. Neurobiologically, multisensory integration occurs at multiple levels of the central nervous system. While early models posited that sensory modalities remained largely separate until they reached higher associative cortices, while recent evidence shows that integration can occur at surprisingly early stages. For example, primary sensory areas such as the visual cortex, VON, and auditory cortex, AON, exhibit responses modulated by inputs from other senses. This cross-modal influence suggests that even so, called unimodal brain regions, are capable of processing multisensory information under certain conditions. More explicitly integrative areas, such as the superior colliculus and the posterior parietal cortex, have been shown to contain neurons that respond to multiple sensory modalities. These multisensory neurons often display a nonlinear response to combined stimuli, a hallmark of true integration rather than mere summation. The functional benefits of multisensory integration are manifold. One of its most critical roles is in enhancing the saliency and reliability of sensory information. In noisy environments, visual cues can disambiguate spoken words, as seen in audio-visual speech processing. Similarly, the combination of tactile and visual feedback improves object manipulation and haptic perception. Reaction times are generally faster for multisensory stimuli compared to unisensory ones, a phenomenon known as the redundant signals effect. This has practical implications in fields ranging from education and human-computer interaction to the design of assistive technologies for individuals with sensory impairment. Multisensory integration is also subject to developmental and experiential influences. Infants are born with rudimentary capacities for multisensory processing, such as the ability to detect synchrony between lip movements and speech sounds. However, the efficiency and precision of integration improve with age and are shaped by environmental exposure. There is a critical period during development when the brain is particularly sensitive to multisensory correlations, and disruptions during this window can lead to long-term perceptual deficits. Studies on individuals with congenital sensory deficits, such as blindness or deafness, reveal both limitations and compensatory enhancements in other sensory domains, suggesting a dynamic interplay between neural plasticity and sensory inbuilt sensory functions. On the pathological end of the spectrum, impairments in multisensory integration have been implicated in various neurodevelopmental and psychiatric disorders. For instance, individuals with autism spectrum disorder, ASD, often exhibit atypical multisensory processing, including difficulties in integrating audiovisual speech cues and reduced sensitivity to temporal synchrony. This may contribute to the social and communicative challenges characteristic of the disorder. Similarly, in schizophrenia, aberrant multisensory integration has been linked to hallucinations and distorted body ownership, highlighting its role in maintaining a coherent sense of self and reality. These findings underscore the importance of multisensory processing, not only in perception, but also in higher cognitive and affective functions. Technological advancements have enabled the detailed investigation of multisensory integration through neuroimaging, electrophysiology, and computational modeling. Functional MRI, fMRI, studies reveal patterns of activation that correspond to multisensory processing across widespread cortical and subcortical regions. Techniques such as magnetoencephalography, MEG, and electroencephalography, EEG, provide insights into the timing and dynamics of integration. Computational models, ranging from Bayesian frameworks to neural network simulations, aim to quantify how our brain weights and combines inputs from different sensors under conditions of uncertainty. These models often posit that the brain operates as a probabilistic inference machine, optimizing sensory estimates by integrating information in proportion to its reliability, a concept known as weighted integration. Applications of multisensory integration research extend into many domains. In virtual reality and augmented reality systems, synchronizing sensory cues enhances immersion and reduces motion sickness. In education, multisensory teaching methods leverage the principle that information presented through multiple modalities can reinforce learning and memory. Clinical rehabilitation strategies for stroke, trauma, or sensory loss often employ multisensory training to promote neural recovery and functional compensation. Moreover, understanding how the brain integrates sensory information has ethical and philosophical implications for artificial intelligence, consciousness, and the construction of reality itself. Despite its advances, the field faces ongoing challenges and questions. One area of inquiry is understanding the boundary conditions of integration. When does the brain decide to integrate versus segregate sensory signals? Another involves exploring individual differences. Why do some people exhibit stronger or weaker multisensory integration? And how is this linked to genetic, developmental, or experiential factors? Furthermore, as we increasingly engage with artificial sensory environments. Questions arise about how prolonged exposure to non-naturalistic stimuli affects the brain's integrative mechanisms. Addressing these questions will require interdisciplinary collaboration spanning neuroscience, psychology, engineering, and philosophy. In summary, multisensory integration is a dynamic and essential aspect of human cognition that underlies our seamless interaction with the world. It enhances perception, speeds responses, supports learning, and contributes to a coherent sense of reality. Through sophisticated neural computations, the brain melds diverse sensory streams into unified experiences, enabling us to navigate complex environments with efficiency and grace. As our understanding deepens, the implications for technology, medicine, and society continue to expand, promising new ways to augment and restore human perception. Mind wandering and daydreaming are ubiquitous facets of human cognition, occupying a substantial portion of our mental lives. Research suggests that the average person spends anywhere from 30 to 50 of their waking hours engaged in thoughts that are unrelated to the task at hand. These internally directed mental states, often dismissed as distractions or inefficiencies, are increasingly recognized for their nuanced roles in cognition, creativity, emotion regulation, and self-reflection. As a subject of scientific inquiry, mind wandering bridges the domains of cognitive psychology, neuroscience, and even philosophy, offering insight into the complex architecture of consciousness. Mind wandering is typically defined as a shift in attention from an external task toward internal thoughts that are unrelated to the immediate environment. It encompasses a range of mental activities, such as fantasizing, planning for the future, revisiting past experiences, or simply letting the mind drift without any particular direction. Daydreaming is a closely related concept, often viewed as a more elaborate or immersive form of mind wandering, characterized by vivid narrative-like thought sequences. Both phenomena involve decoupling from external stimuli and are generally internally generated, spontaneous, and subjectively rich. From a neurocognitive perspective, mind wandering has been closely associated with the activity of the default mode network, MEM, a set of brain regions including the medial prefrontal cortex, posterior cingulate cortex, and angular gyrus. The down is more active during rest, or when an individual is not focused on the outside world, and it is thought to support internally focused tasks such as autobiographical memory, envisioning the future, and considering other perspectives. Interestingly, mind wandering often co-activates executive control networks, suggesting that it is not merely a lapse in attention but can be a goal-directed, albeit internally oriented, process. This challenges the earlier dichotomy of attention as being either task-focused or deficient, proposing instead a duality wherein the mind can engage in meaningful internal cognition even while disengaged from the external task. Cognitively, mind wandering has both costs and benefits. On the negative side, it has been consistently linked with reduced performance in tasks requiring sustained attention or rapid responses. In educational settings, students who frequently mind wander during lectures or reading assignments show poorer comprehension and retention of material. Similarly, in real-world activities like driving, episodes of mind wandering can increase the risk of errors and accidents. These findings have led some researchers to categorize mind wandering as a form of cognitive failure in contexts that demand high levels of vigilance and accuracy. However, this view is incomplete without considering the adaptive and potentially beneficial roles of mind wandering. One of its most compelling functions lies in future planning and simulation. When people mind wander, they often engage in prospective thought, simulating future scenarios, rehearsing potential conversations, or strategizing about upcoming decisions. This future-oriented thinking allows for better preparedness, goal setting, and emotional regulation in anticipation of challenging situations. Moreover, mind wandering facilitates autobiographical memory consolidation by enabling individuals to revisit and reprocess past events, contributing to a coherent sense of self and narrative identity. Creativity and problem solving are other domains where mind wandering plays a crucial role. Numerous anecdotal accounts and empirical studies suggest that creative insights often arise not during focused work, but in moments of mental drift, such as walking, showering, or engaging in routine tasks. These insights are thought to emerge from the brain's ability to combine disparate ideas and experiences during undirected thought. The phenomenon of incubation, a key stage in creative problem solving, may depend heavily on the brain's capacity for spontaneous recombination of ideas during mind-wandering episodes. Individual differences in the content and control of mind-wandering also matter. While some individuals experience pleasant and constructive daydreams, others report intrusive and distressing thought. The valence of these mental episodes is significant. Positive, future-oriented daydream has been linked with greater psychological well-being, while negative or ruminative mind-wandering is associated with depression, anxiety, and attention deficits. This highlights the importance of metacognitive awareness and emotional context in shaping the outcomes of mind wandering. Indeed, interventions such as mindfulness training seek to enhance awareness of one's thought patterns, offering a way to modulate the frequency and nature of spontaneous thought. Another crucial dimension of mind wandering is its relationship with consciousness and the sense of self. Mind wandering episodes often involve self-referential thought, allowing individuals to engage with their values, desires, and identity. This self-referential processing is central to understanding the continuity of consciousness over time, and may explain why people often report a sense of inner dialogue or narrative mind during daydreams. Philosophically, this speaks to the reflexive nature of human consciousness, the ability to think about oneself and one's experiences across time, which is both a hallmark and a mystery of the human mind. Despite its complexity, mind wandering remains difficult to study directly, primarily because of its transient and private nature. Researchers rely on experience sampling methods, where participants report their thoughts in real time, and neuroimaging techniques to infer patterns of brain activity associated with off-task thought. Computational models are also being developed to predict when mind wandering might occur based on patterns of cognitive load, task monotony, or individual traits. These approaches are gradually building a more integrated understanding of how spontaneous thought fits into the broader cognitive ecosystem. Mind wandering and daydreaming thus represent more than mere distraction. They are integral components of mental life, with deep implications for cognitive flexibility, self-knowledge, and psychological health. They challenge the traditional paradigms of attention and task engagement, revealing that the mind's wanderings are not aimless, but often serve important adaptive function. The emerging science of spontaneous thought underscores the brain's remarkable ability to generate complex, meaningful experiences without external input, a testament to the generative power of the mind. In everyday life, we might disparage moments when our mind drifts during a conversation or a meeting. Yet these very lapses may be quietly nurturing our creativity, organizing our memories, or rehearsing our next life decision. The goal, then, is not to eliminate mind-wandering, but to understand and harness it, distinguishing between forms that nourish our inner life and those that hinder our external goals. As the science deepens, so too does our appreciation of the wandering mind, not as a failure of attention, but as a feature of our most uniquely human capacities. Metacognition, commonly defined as thinking about thinking, is a multifaceted construct central to the understanding of how individuals regulate and control their cognitive processes. It encompasses both the awareness of one's cognitive activities and the strategies employed to manage them effectively. For a well-educated audience, particularly those familiar with educational psychology, cognitive science, or philosophy of mind, metacognition represents not merely an academic abstraction, but a vital mechanism underpinning self-regulating and effective decision-making and effective decision. The term was popularized by developmental psychologist John Flavel in the 1970s, who distinguished between metacognitive knowledge, what individuals know about their own cognition, the mechanisms they employ to control and optimize that cognition. This duality forms the core of modern interpretations and applications of metacognitive theory. Metacognitive knowledge involves awareness of three primary variables: person, task, and strategy. But person knowledge refers to what individuals understand about their own cognitive strengths and limitations, as well as those of others. Task knowledge entails understanding the nature and requirements of a particular cognitive challenge, while strategy knowledge concerns the procedures and techniques that can be employed to facilitate comprehension, problem, and memory. For example, a seasoned academic might recognize that they are prone to distraction, person knowledge, know that a lengthy research article demands sustained attention and critical evaluation, task knowledge, and choose to annotate the text or summarize each section and insight. Metacognitive regulation, on the other hand, involves planning, monitoring, and evaluating one's cognitive efforts. But planning includes setting goals, selecting appropriate strategies, and allocating resources. Monitoring refers to the ongoing assessment of one's understanding and performance, and evaluating involves reviewing and reflecting on the outcomes to inform future action. These regulatory processes are iterative and dynamic. They not only influence how tasks are approached and completed, but also contribute to a learner's development over time. A scientist preparing a research grant proposal might begin by organizing their literature review, planning, periodically checking if the argument remains coherent and well supported, monitoring, and after submission, reflecting on how the proposal could be improved, evaluating. The significance of metacognition is well established in education and cognitive psychology. where it is often linked to academic achievement and lifelong learning. Numerous studies have demonstrated that students with strong metacognitive skills tend to perform better academically because they can adapt their strategies in response to feedback, recognize when they are confused, and seek help or modify their approach accordingly. Importantly, metacognitive skills can be taught and developed. Instructional practices that explicitly focus on fostering metacognitive awareness, such as self-questioning, reflective journals, and guided strategy instruction, enable learners to become more autonomous and effective thinkers. Moreover, digital tools and learning analytics are increasingly being used to scaffold metacognitive development, providing learners with real-time feedback and prompting reflection during learning activities. In cognitive neuroscience, recent advancements have begun to unravel the neural correlates of metacognition, revealing the involvement of the prefrontal cortex in metacognitive judgment and control. Functional imaging studies show that regions such as the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and anterior cingulate cortex are activated during tasks requiring self-monitoring and error detection. These findings not only support the psychological models of metacognition, but also offer insight into individual differences in metacognitive ability, which may be rooted in both structural and functional brain variations. This line of research has implications for understanding cognitive decline in aging, developmental disorders such as ADHD, and psychiatric conditions like schizophrenia, where metacognitive impairments are commonly observed. Philosophically, metacognition raises profound questions about the nature of consciousness and self-awareness. It is closely tied to theories of higher-order thought, which propose that a mental state becomes conscious only when it is the object of another higher-order mental state. In this view, metacognition is a crucial component of conscious experience itself. The perspective not only bridges psychology and philosophy, but also prompts ethical and epistemological inquiries about human rationality, responsibility, and the nature of knowledge. For instance, if metacognitive capacity underlies rational agency, the deficits in this capacity, whether due to neurological damage or developmental factors, challenge traditional notions of moral and epistemic accountability. Beyond the individual level, metacognition also operates in social and collaborative contexts. Social metacognition refers to how individuals think about the cognition of others, such as during group problem solving or collaborative learning. It involves perspective, taking, shared regulation of thinking processes, and meta-level dialogue about the task and strategies. In educational settings, fostering social metacognitive skills can enhance group cohesion, mutual understanding, and collective intelligence. Moreover, in professional environments such as clinical diagnosis, legal reasoning, or business strategy, metacognitive awareness enables practitioners to critically evaluate their own assumptions, recognize biases, and engage in reflective practice. Despite its broad applicability, metacognition is not without its challenges. Measuring metacognitive ability remains a complex and contested issue. Self-report questionnaires, think aloud, protocols, and task-based performance measures each offer partial glimpses into metacognitive functioning, but none capture its full complexity. Moreover, cultural and contextual factors significantly shape how metacognition is expressed and valued. In some cultural settings, for example, overt self-reflection may be discouraged or interpreted differently, affecting how metacognitive behavior is manifested and assessed. Thus, advancing metacognitive research requires interdisciplinary collaboration and methodological innovation to better understand its nuances across diverse populations and contexts. In conclusion, metacognition is a foundational construct that intersects multiple domains of human cognition, learning, and behavior. It empowers individuals to be more reflective, strategic, and adaptable in their thinking, thereby enhancing both personal growth and professional competence. From classrooms to courtrooms, from solitary study to collaborative innovation, metacognitive processes are the invisible engines that drive effective problem-solving and intelligent behavior. As research continues to uncover the mechanisms and applications of metacognition, its integration, technology, and public policy holds transformative potential for cultivating a more thoughtful and self-aware society. Mental imagery, often described as the mind's eye, refers to the ability to recreate perceptual experience in the absence of direct sensory input. Though it involves no physical stimulus, mental imagery can be remarkably vivid, involving visual, auditory, tactile, olfactory, and even gustatory representation. For centuries, philosophers and psychologists have debated its nature and function, with figures like Aristotle, Descartes, and later William James acknowledging imagery as central to cognition. Contemporary cognitive neuroscience continues to affirm its significance, suggesting that mental imagery shares considerable neural overlap with perception itself. The most common and well-studied form of mental imagery is visual imagery. One imagines a sunset or the face of a loved one. The brain appears to activate visual cortices similar to those involved in seeing the actual scene or person. Functional magnetic resonance imaging, MRI, studies have consistently demonstrated that imagining a visual scene can elicit activity in the primary visual cortex, as well as in higher order visual areas, Costney et al. 1995. This observation supports the shared representational hypothesis, which posits that imagery and perception utilize overlapping cognitive and neural systems. However, it is also recognized that imagery and perception are not identical. For instance, mental images are often less detailed and more susceptible to cognitive biases compared to real perception. Importantly, mental imagery is not restricted to the visual domain. Auditory imagery allows individuals to hear a tune in their heads without any external sound. Musicians, in particular, report vivid auditory imagery, and neuroimaging shows activation in auditory cortices during such tasks. Similarly, motor imagery, the internal simulation of movement without actual execution, activates areas such as the premotor cortex, supplementary motor area, and cerebellum. This form of imagery is so functionally relevant that it is now used in athletic training and neurorehabilitation, especially for stroke patients recovering motor function. Olfactory and gustatory imagery, though less frequently studied, also exist and are thought to involve the orbitofrontal cortex and related structures. One of the most compelling functions of mental imagery lies in its role in memory. According to Pavio's dual coding theory, concrete concepts are better remembered than abstract ones because they are encoded both verbally and visually. For example, the word apple is more easily remembered than justice because one can form a mental image of an apple, supplementing the verbal code. Mental imagery thus serves as an auxiliary route to memory retrieval, enhancing recall and recognition. This is particularly evident in mnemonic techniques like the method of Loshi, where items to be remembered are mentally placed along a familiar spatial route. Ancient orators used this technique to deliver lengthy speeches without notes, highlighting the robustness of imagery-based memory systems. Imagery also plays a crucial role in problem solving and reasoning. Einstein famously described his thought experiments as vivid mental visualizations that preceded formal mathematical formulation. Studies have found that people who are good at spatial imagery perform better on tasks that involve mental rotation, navigation, and mechanical reasoning. In mathematics and physics, visual spatial thinking often enables practitioners to intuitively grasp complex relationships before formal derivations are made. In literature and creative writing, authors utilize imagery to create immersive narratives, while readers generate mental images to visualize story worlds, characters, and events. Mental imagery further contributes to emotional processing. Intrusive imagery is a hallmark of several psychiatric conditions, including post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, where individuals re-experience traumatic events through involuntary, vivid imagery. Conversely, positive imagery interventions have been shown to improve mood and reduce symptoms of depression and anxiety. In cognitive behavioral therapy, patients are often encouraged to modify distressing images into more neutral or empowering ones, demonstrating imagery's malleability and therapeutic potential. The vividness, controllability, and emotional salience of mental imagery make it a powerful vehicle for both suffering and healing. Despite its ubiquity, mental imagery exhibits substantial individual differences. Some people report extremely vivid imagery, akin to hallucination, while others, a condition known as aphantasia, report little to no capacity for mental imagery. Aphantasia is not necessarily linked to deficits in memory or intelligence, but highlights that cognitive experiences can vary dramatically across individuals. On the other end of the spectrum, hyperphantasia describes individuals whose imagery is unusually vivid. These differences are not merely anecdotal. They are associated with measurable variations in brain activity. For instance, people with stronger imagery show greater activation in the visual cortex during imagery tasks. Recent developments in artificial intelligence and brain-computer interfaces have also brought mental imagery into new domains. Neuroimaging-based decoding techniques have shown that it is possible to reconstruct crude visual images that individuals are imagining based purely on brain activity patterns. While still in early stages, such research opens doors to potential applications in communication for locked, impatience, dream recording, and even art generation based on mental imagery. It also raises ethical questions about cognitive privacy and the boundaries of neurotechnology. Philosophically, mental imagery has fueled debates about the nature of consciousness, and representation. The imagery debate in cognitive science, prominent in the 1970s and 1980s, saw figures like Stephen Koslin, Zenon Pylyshyn argue over whether mental images are depictive, like pictures in the mind, or propositional, abstract language representations. While neuroimaging has provided evidence favoring the depictive model, especially in spatial tasks, some argue that high-level cognition is best explained by symbolic manipulation, rather than pictorial representation. Today, many scholars accept a hybrid view, recognizing that mental representations can be both sensory and abstract, depending on context and task demands. In education, the pedagogical power of mental imagery is increasingly recognized. Visualizations help students understand abstract concepts, especially in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics (STEM). Dynamic imagery, such as mentally simulating the movement of molecules or astronomical bodies, can bridge the gap between theory and intuition. Educational strategies often integrate diagrams, animations, and interactive models to engage students' imagery faculties, reinforcing comprehension through multimodal learning. The study of mental imagery thus intersects with multiple disciplines, from cognitive psychology and neuroscience to education, philosophy, and clinical science. It is a testament to the complexity of human cognition that we can simulate sensory experiences, navigate imagined spaces, solve problems, and even transform our emotions, all within the theater of the mind. Far from being a mere curiosity, mental imagery is central to how we think, learn, remember, and feel. Understanding it not only enriches our grasp of cognition, but also enhances the tools we have for personal development, education, and therapy. Learning and conditioning are foundational processes in both human and animal behavior, representing the means by which organisms adapt their environments through experience. These mechanisms underpin everything from the simplest reflexes to the most complex forms of human cognition. At its core, learning is defined as a relatively permanent change in behavior or knowledge due to experience, while conditioning refers more specifically to the systematic process by which such learning occurs through association, reinforcement, or observation. Historically, the scientific study of learning began with classical conditioning, first systematically explored by the Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov in the early 20th century. Pavlov's seminal experiments with dogs demonstrated that a neutral stimulus, when paired repeatedly with an unconditioned stimulus that naturally produces a response, can eventually elicit that response independently. In his classic setup, Pavlov rang a bell, neutral stimulus, before presenting food, unconditioned stimulus, which elicited salivation, conditioned response. Over time, the bell alone elicited salivation, now termed a conditioned response to a conditioned stimulus. This discovery illuminated how organisms form associations between stimuli, highlighting the predictive nature of learning, a key adaptation for survival. While classical conditioning explains how reflexive behaviors can become associated with new stimuli, it does not account for the learning of voluntary behaviors. This is where operant conditioning, developed extensively by B.F. Skinner, becomes essential. Operant conditioning revolves around the use of consequences to modify the occurrence and form of behavior. Skinner demonstrated that behaviors followed by reinforcing stimuli are more likely to occur again, whereas behaviors followed by punishment are less likely to be repeated. Reinforcements can be positive, adding a pleasant stimulus, or negative, removing an unpleasant one, and schedule of reinforcement, whether continuous or intermittent, has profound implications for the durability and strength of the learned behavior. An important distinction between classical and operant conditioning is the agency of the learner. In classical conditioning, the organism is relatively passive, responding to associations imposed upon it. In operant conditioning, the organism is active, engaging with its environment to bring about outcome. This distinction allows operant conditioning to be particularly effective in explaining complex human behavior, from language acquisition to classroom learning and behavioral therapy. Beyond these foundational forms, cognitive and social learning theories have expanded our understanding of learning mechanism. Albert Bandura's work on observational learning introduced the notion that individuals can learn by watching others, a process known as modeling. This insight brought attention to the importance of internal processes, such as attention, retention, and motivation, in learning. Bandura's famous Bobo doll experiments revealed that children who observed adults behaving aggressively toward a toy were more likely to imitate that aggression themselves, especially if the behavior was rewarded. This type of vicarious reinforcement showed that learning could occur without direct experience, challenging the behaviorist view that all learning is the result of direct interaction with the environment. Cognitive approaches also emphasize the role of mental representations and the processing of information. Edward Tolman's research on latent learning, for instance, suggested that organisms can acquire knowledge that remains hidden until it becomes useful. In one experiment, rats placed in a maze without rewards nonetheless learned the layout, as demonstrated when rewards were later introduced. Rats immediately navigated the maze efficiently, revealing pre-existing cognitive map. These findings emphasized that learning is not always immediately reflected in behavior, and that internal mental processes play a significant role. Neurological research has further deepened our understanding of the biological substrates of learning and conditioning. The concept of synaptic plasticity, particularly long-term potentiation, LILPA, provides a molecular basis for learning and memory. It refers to the strengthening of synapses based on recent patterns of activity, and it has been extensively studied in the hippocampus, a brain region crucial for memory formation. Conditioning experiences can lead to structural changes in neural circuits, solidifying the connection between behavioral and physiological perspectives. Moreover, different types of learning have been mapped to distinct neural pathways. For example, fear conditioning, a form of classical conditioning, engages the amygdala, a brain region responsible for processing emotional reactions. Operant conditioning, on the other hand, relies heavily on the basal ganglia and the dopaminergic system, which are involved in reward processing and habit formation. Such findings have significant clinical implications, especially in understanding and treating conditions like anxiety disorders, addiction, and obsessive-compulsive disorder, where maladaptive learning processes are often at play. One particularly relevant application of learning and conditioning principles is behavior therapy, including techniques such as systematic desensitization and exposure therapy. These methods use the principles of classical conditioning to extinguish maladaptive responses, such as phobias, by gradually exposing individuals to the feared stimulus in a controlled, non-threatening environment. Similarly, behavior modification programs based on operant conditioning are used in educational settings, organizational behavior management, and clinical psychology to reinforce desirable behaviors and reduce problematic ones. In recent decades, the interplay between genetics and learning, epigenetics, has added a new layer of complexity. While learning is shaped by experience, the capacity for learning and the ease with which certain associations are formed are influenced by genetic predisposition. For example, research has shown that some phobias, such as fear of snakes or spiders, are more readily acquired, suggesting an evolutionary preparedness to learn certain associations more quickly due to ancestral survival pressures. Modern computational and artificial intelligence models have also drawn inspiration from learning and conditioning principles. Reinforcement learning, a subset of machine learning, closely mirrors operant conditioning by using reward signals to optimize behavior. These algorithms enable machines to learn complex tasks such as game playing, robotic control, and recommendation systems, showcasing the enduring relevance of conditioning principles in technological innovation. In sum, learning and conditioning are dynamic, multifaceted processes that form the basis for adaptation, development, and behavioral flexibility. From the predictable reflexes observed by Pavlov, to the intentional behaviors analyzed by Skinner, to the cognitive insights of Tolman and Bandura, and finally to the molecular and computational models of the 21st century, our understanding of learning has evolved dramatically. Yet, at every level, from neurons to networks, from classrooms to clinics, the central insight remains. Behavior is shaped by experience, and through this shaping, organisms survive, thrive, and innovate. Language production, the process by which thoughts are transformed into spoken, written, or signed language, is a fundamental aspect of human cognition and communication. It involves a complex interplay of cognitive, linguistic, and motoric processes that operate in a coordinated and often rapid manner. Understanding language production requires delving into its underlying mechanisms, including conceptualization, formulation, and articulation, as well as considering the social and neurological contexts in which it occurs. At its core, language production begins with the speaker's intention to convey a message. This intention originates in the conceptualization stage, where the speaker decides on the content to communicate. This stage is pre-linguistic and involves the selection and organization of relevant thoughts or ideas from a vast array of experiences and knowledge. For example, if one wishes to describe a scene at the beach, the mind retrieves visual, auditory, tactile, and emotional impressions related to that setting. This conceptual content is structured internally before any linguistic encoding begins. Once a communicative intention is established, the process moves into formulation, which converts nonverbal thoughts into linguistic representations. Formulation comprises two major sub-processes: grammatical encoding and phonological encoding. Grammatical encoding involves selecting appropriate words, lexical selection, and structuring them according to syntactic rules. Lexical access is not simply about retrieving word meanings. It also involves selecting words that fit syntactic frames and match the intended message. For instance, choosing between rune and jog might depend on nuances in meaning or the formality of the context. During this stage, speakers also determine the sentence structure, active or passive voice order, tense, and agreement, based on grammatical conventions and discourse demand. Phonological encoding follows, wherein the selected words are converted into a sequence of sounds. This process engages phonemic retrieval and the construction of prosodic patterns, including intonation, stress, and rhythm. Importantly, phonological encoding must account for articulation effects and ensure fluid transitions between phonemes, which adds complexity to speech planning. The final stage of language production is articulation, which translates the phonological plan into motor commands that guide the articulatory organs, tongue, lips, jaw, and vocal cords to produce spoken output. This step involves real-time coordination of fine motor movements and is highly susceptible to disruption, as seen in speech disorders like stuttering or dysarthria. It is during articulation that the abstract linguistic plan is rendered into a physical signal, enabling communication to occur. Notably, articulation is not a passive execution of a plan. Feedback from auditory and somatosensory systems continuously monitors output and enables adjustments, ensuring accuracy and intelligibility. Underlying these stages are intricate networks of neural structures. Language production relies heavily on areas in the left hemisphere, particularly Broca's area, which is implicated in grammatical processing and speech motor planning, and the motor cortex, which orchestrates the physical execution of speech. The temporal lobe also plays a critical role in lexical retrieval and semantic processing. Importantly, these regions do not operate in isolation. They form dynamic, interconnected circuits that facilitate seamless transitions between stages. Functional neuroimaging studies have shown that even simple utterances activate widespread areas, underscoring the distributed nature of language processing in the brain. Furthermore, production processes are not strictly linear. There is growing evidence for cascaded and interactive models, suggesting that stages overlap and influence each other. For example, phonological planning can begin before grammatical encoding is fully complete, and feedback loops allow later stages to influence earlier ones. This dynamism enhances flexibility and fluency, allowing speakers to adapt quickly to changing communicative demands. Social and contextual factors also significantly shape language production. Speakers adjust their language based on audience, setting, and purpose, a phenomenon known as audience design. This includes choosing appropriate vocabulary, tone, and level of formality. Moreover, language production is embedded in dialogue, where turn-taking, repair mechanisms, and feedback necessitate rapid adjustment. Pragmatic competence, the ability to use language effectively in context, is thus integral to successful language production. Developmentally, language production evolves through stages, from babbling in infancy to complex sentence construction in adulthood. This trajectory reflects both biological maturation and environmental input. Children acquire production skills through interaction, imitation, and feedback, gradually mastering the rules of their language. In adults, bilingualism and multilingualism further illustrate the adaptability of production processes, as speakers switch between linguistic systems based on context and interlocutor. Breakdowns in language production, such as those seen in aphasia, provide insights into its underlying architecture. For instance, Broca's aphasia characterized by halting speech and agrammatism, highlights the role of frontal regions in grammatical encoding. Conversely, Wernicke's aphasia, marked by fluent but nonsensical speech, implicates temporal areas in lexical semantic processing. These dissociations support the modularity of production stages and underscore the importance of specific neural substrates. Technological advances have allowed for refined exploration of production mechanisms. Electrophysiological techniques such as EEG and MEG offer temporal precision, revealing the millisecond by millisecond unfolding of speech planning. Functional MRI provides spatial resolution, mapping active brain areas during production tasks. These tools, combined with computational modeling, have deepened our understanding of the temporal dynamics and neural correlates of language production. Importantly, language production is not confined to speech. Written and signed languages follow similar conceptual and linguistic processes, though the motoric output differs. Writing involves orthographic encoding and fine motor control of the hand, while sign languages utilize spatial, visual modalities and gestural articulators. Despite these differences, core production mechanism, conceptualization, formulation, and articulation remain consistent across modalities, highlighting the universality of the production system. In contemporary research, there is increasing attention to the role of prediction and anticipation in language production. Speakers often plan several words ahead, and predictive mechanisms help streamline processing and improve fluency. Moreover, production is intertwined with comprehension. Speaking and listening share many cognitive and neural resources. In some models, posit a shared representational system. This integration supports interactive dialogue and rapid exchange of information. In sum, language production is a multifaceted, dynamic process that transforms internal thought into communicable output through a series of tightly coordinated stages. It engages a wide array of cognitive operations, neural systems, and contextual considerations, reflecting the richness and adaptability of human language. As our understanding deepens, aided by interdisciplinary research and technological innovation, we continue to uncover the remarkable sophistication underlying our everyday acts of speaking, writing, and signing. Language comprehension is a cornerstone of human cognition, representing the complex mental processes that enable individuals to derive meaning from spoken, written, or signed language. As a multidisciplinary construct, it intersects with linguistics, psychology, neuroscience, and artificial intelligence, reflecting the intricate interplay between syntax, semantics, pragmatics, and contextual knowledge. For a well-educated audience, understanding language comprehension requires an appreciation of both its cognitive architecture and the empirical evidence shaping our current model. At its core, language comprehension begins with decoding linguistic input, whether visual symbols on a page or auditory signals in speech, through perceptual mechanism. For reading, this involves visual recognition of graphemes and mapping them on corresponding phonemes, but for listening, it entails parsing phonological streams into discrete lexical items. This foundational stage, however, is only the beginning. True comprehension requires the integration of these lexical items into syntactic structures that represent sentence-level meaning. Syntax provides the scaffolding that supports semantic interpretation, determining roles such as agent and patient, or subject and object, based on grammatical rules and word order. Yet language comprehension is far from deterministic. Ambiguity often arises, and the human brain must resolve competing interpretations using contextual clues and prior knowledge. Semantics, the layer of meaning associated with words and phrases, plays a critical role in guiding comprehension. Lexical semantics pertains to the meanings of individual words and their relationships, such as synonyms, antonyms, or hyponyms, while compositional semantics concerns how these meanings combine according to syntactic rules. Consider the sentence, "The cat chased the mouse." Here, the verb chased implies a directional action, while the subject and object are assigned roles that align with typical world knowledge about predator-prey dynamics. If the sentence were instead, "The mouse chased the cat," semantic knowledge clashes with real-world plausibility, prompting additional cognitive effort to reconcile this anomaly. This illustrates the necessity of integrating semantic understanding with pragmatic inference, as language users constantly leverage contextual information, speaker intent, and shared knowledge to arrive at coherent interpretations. Pragmatics thus represents the interpretative layer that accounts for the speaker's intentions and the socio-communicative context. For instance, the utterance, "Can you pass the salt?" is typically understood not as a query about ability, but as a polite request, a meaning inferred through pragmatic reasoning rather than literal semantic analysis. From a neurocognitive perspective, language comprehension is supported by a network of specialized brain regions. Broca's area, traditionally associated with language production, is now also understood to play a role in syntactic processing and working memory. Wernicke's area is implicated in the retrieval of word meanings and the integration of semantic information. Functional neuroimaging studies reveal that comprehension activates a distributed system involving the superior temporal gyrus, inferior frontal gyrus, angular gyrus, as units of the prefrontal cortex. These areas coordinate to support lexical access, syntactic parsing, semantic integration, and inferencing. Furthermore, evidence from event-related potentials, ERBs, such as the N400 component, indicates the brain's sensitivity to semantic incongruity, while the 600 is often linked to syntactic reanalysis. These findings underscore the dynamic and time-sensitive nature of language comprehension, with different components unfolding over milliseconds as the brain incrementally builds meaning from linguistic input. Developmentally, language comprehension emerges early in infancy and evolves through exposure and interaction. Infants as young as 6 months show sensitivity to word boundaries and prosodic cues in speech. As vocabulary grows, children begin to internalize grammatical structures and narrative conventions, refining their comprehension abilities through both formal education and informal communication. Disorders such as specific language impairment, SLI, and aphasia reveal how disruptions in these processes can impair comprehension. In SLI, children may struggle with morphosyntactic rules, leading to difficulties in parsing complex sentences. In aphasia, damage to specific brain regions results in comprehension deficits that vary depending on the type and location of the lesion. These clinical cases provide crucial insights into the modular and interconnected nature of language processing system. Computational models of language comprehension, particularly those rooted in connectionist and probabilistic frameworks, offer valuable analogies for human cognition. Connectionist models simulate language understanding through networks that learn statistical regularities in input data, mimicking neural processes. Probabilistic models, on the other hand, treat comprehension as a form of Bayesian inference, where the brain updates its beliefs based on incoming evidence and prior expectation. These models have been instrumental in explaining phenomena such as garden path sentences, temporarily ambiguous constructions that mislead the reader or listener into an incorrect initial interpretation. For example, in The Old Man, the Boats, the noun phrase old man is initially misparsed, requiring reanalysis once the unexpected verb may appear. Such cases exemplify the brain's predictive nature, constantly anticipating and revising interpretations as new information becomes available. Cross-linguistic research further enriches our understanding of language comprehension by revealing universal principles and language-specific variation. While all languages must balance syntactic structure, semantic richness, and pragmatic nuance, the strategies they employ can differ markedly. For instance, languages with free word order, such as Russian, rely heavily on morphological cues to indicate grammatical relationships, whereas fixed word order languages like English use syntactic position more rigidly. This variability challenges theories of a universal grammar while supporting models that emphasize adaptability and learning. Bilingualism adds another layer of complexity, demonstrating that language comprehension is not only flexible but also context-dependent. Bilingual individuals often switch between languages seamlessly, adjusting their interpretive frameworks based on cues such as interlocutor, identity, topic, and sociolinguistic norm. Neuroimaging studies suggest that while bilingual brains recruit overlapping areas for both languages, executive control regions such as the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex are more engaged, reflecting the cognitive demands of language switching and inhibition. Ultimately, language comprehension is not merely a passive reception of information, but an active, inferential, and socially embedded process. It involves rapid integration of phonological, lexical, syntactic, semantic, and pragmatic information, all modulated by context, memory, and attention. It reflects both the brain's computational prowess and its capacity for abstraction, empathy, and creativity. Whether decoding the literal meaning of a sentence or appreciating irony in a novel, language comprehension enables us to connect, collaborate, and construct shared reality. The continuing exploration of this faculty through behavioral experiments, neuroimaging, developmental studies, and artificial intelligence holds promise not only for unraveling the mysteries of human cognition, but also harnessing human-computer interaction and human-computer interactions. As we deepen our understanding of how language is comprehended, we gain insight into the very mechanism that make us uniquely human. Language acquisition is one of the most remarkable cognitive achievements of the human mind, reflecting an intricate interplay of biology, environment, and social interaction. From the moment a child is born, they are immersed in a world saturated with language, and by the age of 3, most children can produce complex sentences, understand nuanced meaning, and engage in effective communication. This feat is accomplished with minimal direct instruction, suggesting that language learning is not simply a matter of imitation, but a deeper, more structured process rooted in our neurocognitive architecture. Scholars distinguish between first language acquisition the natural process by which infants acquire their mother tongue, and second, language acquisition, which refers to the learning of additional languages later in life. Although the two share underlying cognitive mechanisms, they differ significantly in ease, outcome, and the neurological pathways involved. The foundation of language acquisition lies in the brain's predisposition to recognize and generate linguistic patterns. Noam Chomsky's theory of universal grammar posits that humans are born with an innate grammatical framework that constrains and guides language learning. According to this theory, despite surface differences among languages, they all share a common structural core, and the human brain is pre-equipped to grasp these structures. This notion challenges earlier behaviorist models, such as those proposed by B.F. Skinner, which viewed language acquisition as a product of reinforcement and imitation. Chomsky's famous poverty of the stimulus argument, highlighting that children often produce grammatically correct but novel sentences they have never heard before, demonstrates that external input alone is insufficient to explain linguistic competence. Instead, internal cognitive mechanisms play a vital role in constructing language from limited exposure. Infants begin their linguistic journey through phonological perception, showing sensitivity to the sounds of language even in the womb. By a few months of age, they can discriminate between phonemes, distinct units of sound, even those not present in their native language, although this ability diminishes with time as they specialize in the phonemic inventory of their environment. This process, known as perceptual narrowing, allows children to hone in on the relevant sounds of their language, facilitating word segmentation and vocabulary acquisition. As they begin to babble, infants engage in a feedback loop of sound production and auditory response, which supports the development of articulation and the mapping of sounds to meaning. Lexical development, the acquisition of words and their meaning, accelerates rapidly in early childhood. By 18 months, children often experience a vocabulary spurt, during which they may learn dozens of new words each week. This phenomenon suggests the existence of innate heuristics or constraints, such as the whole object assumption, the idea that a new word refers to an entire object rather than its parts, and mutual exclusivity, the assumption that objects have only one label. Children also rely on social cues, such as eye gaze and joint attention, to infer the reference of new words, highlighting the role of interaction and context in language learning. The development of syntax, the rules governing sentence structure, follows a more protracted trajectory, but shows remarkable regularity across languages. Children initially produce telegraphic speech composed of content words, want juice, go park, gradually mastering function words, inflections, and complex constructions through exposure, hypothesis testing. Despite the universal milestones observed in first language acquisition, individual differences arise from various factors, including cognitive capacity, socioeconomic status, and the richness of linguistic input. Research has shown that children from language-rich environments where caregivers engage in frequent and varied conversation tend to develop larger vocabularies and more sophisticated grammatical structures. However, even in less stimulating conditions, most children acquire language successfully, underscoring the robustness of the innate language faculty. Cases of atypical language development, such as specific language impairment, SLI, are the effects of extreme social deprivation. provide further insight into the necessity of both biological predispositions and environmental stimuli. Second language acquisition, SLA, introduces a new set of complexities. Unlike first language acquisition, which typically results in native-like proficiency, SLA is influenced heavily by age, motivation, exposure, and cognitive strategies. The critical period hypothesis suggests that there is an optimal window during childhood for acquiring a language to native, like levels, after which neurological changes reduce this capacity. Adults often face challenges in achieving native pronunciation and fluency, although they may excel in metalinguistic awareness and explicit learning strategies. SLA theories range from Krashen's input hypothesis, which emphasizes the importance of comprehensible input, to connectionist models that focus on pattern recognition through exposure. Successful SLA also depends on a learner's first language, as cross-linguistic influence can either facilitate or hinder learning, depending on the similarities and differences between languages. Bilingualism and multilingualism further enrich the study of language acquisition. Children raised in bilingual environments can acquire two languages simultaneously, without confusion, demonstrating a remarkable ability to differentiate and compartmentalize linguistic systems. Bilingual individuals often show cognitive advantages in executive function, such as task switching and attentional control, likely due to the mental management of multiple languages. However, maintaining balanced proficiency across languages requires sustained exposure and use, as dominant language environments can lead to attrition in the less used language. Code switching, the practice of alternating between languages within a conversation, is a natural and often sophisticated behavior reflecting linguistic competence and social adaptation. Recent advances in neuroscience and computational modeling have opened new avenues for understanding language acquisition. Neuroimaging studies have identified specific brain regions, such as Broca's and Wernicke's areas, that are active during language processing and development. These findings support the view that language is localized, but also involve distributed networks across the brain. Computational models, including deep learning algorithms, have been employed to simulate language learning, offering insights into how statistical patterns in language input can lead to the emergence of linguistic structures. However, these models replicate some aspects of human language acquisition. They still fall short of capturing the full richness and flexibility of human communication, particularly in areas like pragmatics and creativity. In conclusion, language acquisition is a dynamic and multifaceted process that showcases the extraordinary capacity of the human brain to transform sound into meaning, thought into speech, and interaction into understanding. It is shaped by a complex interplay of innate structures, environmental input, and social engagement, producing a system that is both universally shared and uniquely individualized. From the first cries of an infant to the eloquence of a poet, language is not merely a tool for communication, but a defining feature of our species, a window into our thoughts, and a bridge between minds. As research continues to evolve, integrating insights from psychology, linguistics, neuroscience, and artificial intelligence, our understanding of how we acquire and use language will only deepen, illuminating one of the most profound mysteries of human nature. Intelligence and cognitive abilities represent some of the most complex and debated constructs in the fields of psychology neuroscience, and education. Though often used interchangeably in popular discourse, these terms encompass distinct yet interconnected domains that describe the mental faculties involved in acquiring knowledge, solving problems, adapting to new situations, and engaging in abstract reasoning. A deeper exploration of these concepts reveals the intricacies of human cognition, the diverse ways intelligence manifests across individuals and cultures, and the methodologies by which scientists attempt to quantify and understand these phenomena. Intelligence is traditionally defined as the global capacity to act purposefully, think rationally, and deal effectively with one's environment. This definition, famously articulated by psychologist David Wechsler, captures the adaptive nature of intelligence. It is not merely about academic prowess or the ability to solve puzzles, but also about how effectively one navigates real-world challenges. The study of intelligence has evolved significantly from its early roots in psychometrics, where scholars like Alfred Binet and Louis Terman pioneered efforts to measure intelligence through standardized testing. These early tests focused primarily on verbal and mathematical reasoning, setting the foundation for what would become the intelligence quotient (IQ) model. Tests have historically aimed to provide a single score to represent a person's intellectual capability relative to others in the population. While they are useful predictors of academic and occupational success, IQ tests have faced criticism for their limited scope and potential cultural bias. They often underrepresent non-verbal and creative forms of intelligence, and may inadequately reflect cognitive abilities in diverse sociocultural contexts. As such, contemporary researchers have expanded the definition of intelligence to include a broader range of human capabilities. Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences, for instance, posits that intelligence is not a monolithic trait, but rather a collection of distinct modalities, such as linguistic, logical, mathematical, spatial, naturalistic, interpersonal, and naturalistic intelligence, and naturalistic intelligence. This pluralistic view of intelligence aligns more closely with the observed diversity of human talents and achievement. Similarly, Robert Sternberg's triarchic theory divides intelligence into analytical, creative, and practical components, emphasizing that intelligence should be evaluated based on a person's ability to adapt, innovate environment. Cognitive abilities, in contrast, refer to the specific mental capabilities that underpin our ability to process information, learn from experience, and perform tasks. These abilities include memory, attention, executive function, language comprehension, processing speed, and problem solving. While intelligence represents a more global, integrative function, cognitive abilities can be seen as the underlying components or building blocks that collectively contribute to intelligent behavior. For example, a person may have strong verbal reasoning, a cognitive ability that supports their overall performance on an intelligence test. Advances in cognitive neuroscience have enabled scientists to study the brain mechanisms that support cognitive function, leading to a better understanding of how different regions and networks contribute to specific mental processes. Neuroimaging studies have revealed that high-level cognitive functions are distributed across complex networks rather than localized to single brain regions. The prefrontal cortex, for instance, plays a central role in executive functions such as decision-making, inhibitory control, and working memory, while the hippocampus is critical for long-term memory consolidation. Functional connectivity among these and other brain areas is now understood to be a key determinant of cognitive performance. Genetic and environmental influences also shape intelligence and cognitive ability. Twin and adoption studies suggest that intelligence is highly heritable, with estimates indicating that about 50/80s of variance in IQ can be attributed to genetic factors. However, heritability does not imply immutability. Environmental variables such as nutrition, early childhood education, socioeconomic status, and exposure to enrichment or adversity significantly modulate cognitive development. Moreover, the gene-environment interplay is dynamic, meaning that individuals with certain genetic predispositions may be more or less responsive to specific environmental influences. The role of education in enhancing cognitive abilities and intelligence cannot be overstated. Cognitive training, especially during critical developmental periods, has been shown to improve specific skills like working memory and attention, although the transferability of these gains to broader intelligence remains debated. Lifelong learning and intellectual engagement in adulthood also contribute to maintaining cognitive function, particularly in aging population. Studies on cognitive reserve suggest that individuals with higher education and mentally stimulating lifestyles are better able to compensate for age-related declines and neuropathological changes, disease. Cultural perspectives further complicate the assessment and interpretation of intelligence. In Western societies, intelligence is often equated with speed of processing, abstract reasoning, and verbal fluency. In contrast, other cultures may place greater value on social intelligence, practical problem solving, or wisdom. Cross-cultural research underscores the importance of designing assessments that are ecologically valid and culturally sensitive, avoiding the imposition of one cultural framework onto diverse populations. Technological developments, particularly in artificial intelligence, AI, have sparked new debates about the nature of intelligence. While machines can now outperform humans in specific tasks such as chess or data retrieval, their intelligence remains fundamentally different from human cognition. AI systems rely on large datasets and algorithmic processing, but lack consciousness, self-awareness, and emotional intelligence. This comparison highlights that human intelligence is not only computational, but also emotional, ethical, and contextual. An emerging area of interest is the interaction between emotion and cognition. Emotional intelligence, the capacity to recognize, understand, and manage one's own emotions and those of others, has been recognized as a distinct but complementary facet of human intelligence. Emotional and social competencies contribute substantially to success in interpersonal contexts, leadership, and well-being, even if they are not captured by traditional EQ measures. Intelligence and cognitive abilities are multifaceted constructs that encompass a wide range of mental functions and skills. While intelligence serves as a global index of one's capacity to adapt, learn, and solve problems. Cognitive abilities represent the specific mechanisms that enable these functions. Scientific inquiry into these domains continues to evolve, integrating insights from psychology, neuroscience, genetics, education, and cross-cultural studies. Understanding these concepts more holistically allows for a more inclusive and accurate appreciation of human potential, as well as more equitable approaches to education, assessment, and social development. Implicit and explicit memory are two fundamental branches of human memory that underlie how we learn, store, and recall information. Despite their shared purpose in preserving experiences and knowledge, these memory systems operate through distinct cognitive and neural mechanisms, each playing unique roles in our daily functioning. Understanding the differences between implicit and explicit memory not only enriches our comprehension of human cognition, but also informs clinical approaches to memory disorder, educational strategies, and artificial intelligence models mimicking human thought. Explicit memory, also referred to as declarative memory, encompasses information that we can consciously retrieve and articulate. This includes facts, events, and concepts that we are aware of and can describe verbally. For instance, remembering the capital of France or recalling the events of your last birthday involves explicit memory. It is typically divided into two subtypes: episodic memory, which pertains to personal experiences tied to specific times and places, and semantic memory, which consists of general knowledge and facts unanchored from personal context. The functioning of explicit memory is highly reliant on the medial temporal lobe, particularly the hippocampus and surrounding cortices. These brain regions support the encoding, consolidation, and retrieval of declarative information. In contrast, implicit memory, also known as non-declarative memory, refers to the unconscious retention of information that influences thoughts and behaviors without conscious awareness. It manifests in skills and conditioned responses rather than factual recall. Examples include knowing how to ride a bicycle, typing on a keyboard, or experiencing anxiety upon entering a room where one previously faced a traumatic event. Implicit memory is typically divided into several categories: procedural memory, skills and habits, previous exposure affects response to stimuli, classical conditioning, and non-associative learning such as habituation and sensitization. These forms of memory rely on distinct neural circuits, including the basal ganglia, cerebellum, and amygdala, bypassing the hippocampal pathways crucial for explicit recall. One of the most compelling demonstrations of the distinction between these two memory systems comes from clinical observations of patients with amnesia, particularly those with damage to the hippocampus. Such individuals may lose the ability to form new explicit memories, rendering them unable to remember new facts or recent events. However, they often retain intact implicit memory capabilities. A famous case is that of Henry Molaison, HM, who, after bilateral removal of his medial temporal lobes to treat epilepsy, was unable to form new declarative memories, but could still learn new motor skills, such as mirror drawing, without any conscious recollection of having practiced them before. This dissociation strongly supports the notion that implicit and explicit memory rely on separate neural substrates. Cognitively, the processes involved in explicit memory are more resource intensive, requiring focused attention, and active encoding strategies such as elaboration and organization. Explicit recall often benefits from contextual cues and is vulnerable to interference and decay. In contrast, implicit memory operates through repeated exposure and practice, often without deliberate intent to learn. It is typically more robust against decay and interference, which may explain why procedural skills are retained even in the face of severe dementia. Developmentally, implicit memory appears to emerge earlier than explicit memory. Infants who have not yet developed the neural infrastructure for declarative recollection display evidence of implicit learning, such as preference for familiar stimuli and simple conditioned responses. As children mature and their hippocampal and prefrontal regions develop, their capacity for explicit memory improves. This developmental trajectory reflects the evolutionary significance of both systems, with implicit memory providing a foundational learning mechanism for survival, and explicit memory enabling complex reasoning, planning, and social interaction. From an educational perspective, understanding the interplay between implicit and explicit memory can enhance teaching methods. Explicit instruction is crucial for conceptual learning and factual acquisition, while repetition and practice solidify skills through implicit learning. This dual approach is particularly useful in language acquisition, where grammar rules may be taught explicitly, but fluency and pronunciation improve through immersive exposure and practice. Furthermore, adaptive learning technologies increasingly leverage principles of implicit learning, using spaced repetition and gamified reinforcement to facilitate durable knowledge acquisition. In clinical psychology and psychiatry, the distinction has practical implications for diagnosing and treating memory-related disorders. But post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, for example, may involve implicit memory in the form of emotional and physiological responses to trauma-related cues, even in the absence of explicit recollection. Conversely, conditions like Alzheimer's disease often impair explicit memory early on, while implicit memory for routine tasks remains relatively preserved in the early stages. Therapies tailored to the preserved memory system, such as procedural learning techniques for dementia patients, can improve quality of life and functional autonomy. The interplay between implicit and explicit memory also raises fascinating questions about consciousness, self-awareness, and agency. Explicit memory underpins autobiographical narrative and sense of personal identity over time. Implicit memory, operating below conscious awareness, suggests that much of our behavior is influenced by past experiences we cannot recall or articulate. This has ethical and philosophical implications, especially in legal contexts, where implicit biases, shaped by non-declarative memory, can affect judgment and decision-making. Moreover, the rise of artificial intelligence and machine learning further underscores the value of distinguishing between implicit and explicit memory. Traditional AE systems resemble explicit memory in that they manipulate symbolic representations and rules. In contrast, neural networks and reinforcement learning algorithms emulate implicit learning by adjusting weights through repeated exposure to data. Hybrid models that combine symbolic reasoning with pattern recognition aim to replicate the human ability to flexibly use both types of memory, improving machine cognition. In sum, implicit and explicit memory represent two complementary modes of learning and recall that shape human behavior and cognition. Their dissociation in neurological conditions, divergent developmental trajectories, and distinct neural underpinning illustrate the richness and complexity of memory system. While explicit memory allows us to reflect on the past and plan for the future, implicit memory subtly guides our actions, preferences, and emotional responses, often without our awareness. Together, they form the bedrock of human learning, creativity, and identity. Human-computer interaction, HE, is a multidisciplinary field that explores the design and use of computer technologies, focusing particularly on the interfaces between people, users, and computer. As digital systems have become embedded in every aspect of modern life, from healthcare and education to entertainment and industry, the study of how humans interact with these technologies has grown increasingly essential. The goal of HEI is not simply to make computers easier to use, but to understand and shape the experiences users have with digital systems, ultimately optimizing efficiency, usability, accessibility, and even emotional satisfaction. At its core, she blends computer science, cognitive psychology, design, human factors, engineering, and increasingly data science and artificial intelligence. The field has evolved significantly since its early days, when interactions were primarily limited to textual commands inputted into mainframes by a highly trained user. Today, interfaces range from graphical user interfaces, GUIs, on smartphones to voice-based digital assistants, virtual reality environments, gesture-based controls, and even brain-computer interfaces. The sophistication of these interactions demands a more nuanced understanding of human cognition, perception, and behavior, as well as technical innovation in software and hardware. One of the fundamental concepts in HE is usability, which encompasses learnability, efficiency, memorability, errors, and satisfaction. A system is usable if a novice can quickly learn to use it, perform tasks efficiently, remember how to use it after periods of non-use, make few errors, and feel satisfied with the experience. These parameters are assessed through user testing, heuristic evaluations, cognitive walkthroughs, and other user-centered design methodologies. This empirical foundation ensures that designs are not only technically robust, but also grounded in how people actually think and behave. Another essential dimension is accessibility. Designing systems that can be used by people with a wide range of abilities and disabilities. This involves inclusive practices such as screen reader compatibility, alternative text for images, keyboard navigability, and adaptable font sizes. With aging populations and increased awareness of neurodiversity, accessibility in HEI is no longer optional, but central to responsible design. In parallel, ethical considerations such as data, privacy, persuasive technologies, and algorithmic bias are becoming critical issues. As C influences how people receive information, make decisions, and interact socially, designers must grapple with the societal consequences of their system. The importance of context in G cannot be overstated. Interaction is shaped not just by the interface, but by the environment in which it occurs and the goals and constraints of the user. Context, aware systems, those that can adapt to the user's location, activity, or physiological state, represent a significant advancement in this regard. For instance, a mobile app might mute notifications during a meeting or adjust its display based on ambient light. Such responsiveness enhances the user experience, but also introduces new challenges in privacy and data handling. With the advent of ubiquitous computing, the boundaries of interaction are dissolving. Devices now communicate not only with humans, but with each other, forming Internet of Things, IoT, ecosystems. In such environments, the traditional notion of an interface becomes fluid. A smart home might respond to voice commands, automate routines based on user behavior, or integrate with wearable health devices to optimize energy use and well-being. These systems demand new models of interaction, where human intent must be inferred from indirect cues, and the interface is distributed across multiple devices and modalities. Machine learning and artificial intelligence are also reshaping interfaces are becoming adaptive, learning from user behavior to personalize recommendations, automate repetitive tasks, or anticipate needs. While this enhances convenience and engagement, it also raises concerns about transparency and control. Users may not understand why a system behaves a certain way, leading to a phenomenon known as algorithmic opacity. Addressing this requires explainable designing systems that can communicate the rationale behind their decisions in a way that is comprehensible to non-experts. Emotion and affect are emerging as central themes in HE research. Technologies that can detect and respond to user emotions, using voice tone, facial expressions, or physiological signals, have the potential to create more empathetic and engaging experiences. In education, for example, adaptive learning platforms might adjust difficulty based on student frustration. In mental health, digital companions could provide support based on mood detection. However, these developments tread a fine line between helpfulness and intrusion, necessitating careful consideration of consent, ethics, and user autonomy. The development of immersive technologies, such as virtual reality and augmented reality, presents another frontier. These systems offer rich, multisensory interactions that go beyond traditional screen-based interfaces. In VR, users can inhabit fully digital worlds, interact with virtual objects using natural gestures, and even experience embodiment through avatars. In R, digital content is overlaid onto the physical world, enhancing real-world tasks such as navigation, surgery, or industrial maintenance. Designing for these environments involves understanding spatial cognition, motion sickness, sensory integration, and psychological effects of immersion. They also play a pivotal role in education and learning technologies. Digital tools that adapt to different learning styles, provide instant feedback, and support collaborative learning have transformed the classroom. Gamification, integrating game elements into non-game contexts, is one action-driven strategy that leverages engagement to improve learning outcomes. Similarly, in healthcare, CI underpins the design of telemedicine platforms, electronic health records, and patient monitoring systems. These technologies must be not only secure and reliable, but also intuitive enough for patients and practitioners to use under stress or time constraint. In professional settings, SUIT contributes to productivity through task, automation, decision support systems, and intuitive data visualization tool. In scientific research, CC facilitates interaction with complex simulations, large datasets, and collaborative platforms. In creative domains, such as digital art and music, interfaces must support fluid, expressive interaction. Across all these domains, the central challenge of HE remains the same: to bridge the gap between human intention and technological capability in ways that are seamless, empowering, and responsible. Looking ahead, the future of HE will be shaped by advances in neurotechnology, biometrics, and materials science, brain-computer interfaces, which allow direct communication between the brain and a device, offer radical new possibilities for individuals with severe disabilities and for human augmentation more broadly. Soft, wearable interfaces made from flexible materials could make technology even more integrated into our daily lives. At the same time, the growing interdependence between humans and machines calls for a renewed focus on the human condition, on empathy, ethics, and equitable access. In sum, human-computer interaction is not just a technical field, but a human-centered one. It requires a deep understanding of how people perceive, think, feel, and act, combined with the creativity and rigor to translate that understanding. As digital technologies continue to evolve and permeate our lives, the insights and innovations of HI will be essential in ensuring that those technologies serve human needs, aspirations, and value. Heuristics, derived from the Greek word heuriskein, meaning to discover, are cognitive strategies or mental shortcuts used to simplify complex decision-making processes. In essence, heuristics enable individuals to make judgments and solve problems quickly and efficiently, without having to process every detail or consider every possibility. While they do not guarantee optimal or correct solutions, they often produce sufficiently good outcomes, especially under conditions of uncertainty or limited information. As such, heuristics are a cornerstone of both human cognition and artificial intelligence, playing a critical role in areas ranging from everyday decision-making to expert-level problem-solving. The notion of heuristics entered mainstream cognitive psychology largely through the pioneering work of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky in the 1970s. Their research demonstrated that humans rely on a variety of heuristics that, while efficient, can lead to systematic biases and errors. This marked a significant departure from the earlier rational agent models in economics and decision theory, which assumed that individuals make decisions by exhaustively evaluating all available options and outcomes. Instead, Kahneman and Tversky introduced the idea of a bounded rationality, a concept originally proposed by Herbert Constraints Alpha 8 within the constraints of limited time, information, and cognitive resources. Among the most well-known heuristics are the availability heuristic, the representativeness heuristic, and the anchoring and adjustment heuristic. The availability heuristic involves estimating the frequency or probability of an event based on how easily instances of that event come to mind. For example, people might overestimate the risk of plane crashes after hearing about one on the news, even if statistically such events are exceedingly rare. This heuristic works well, in many cases, because events that are more frequent tend to be more memorable. However, media coverage and personal experiences can distort this correlation, leading to skewed perception. The representativeness heuristic involves judging the likelihood of an event based on how similar it is to a prototype or stereotype. For instance, when someone describes a quiet individual who enjoys reading and is meticulous, people might be more likely to guess that the person is a librarian rather than a salesperson, even though the base rate of salespeople far exceeds that of librarians. This heuristic is powerful because it leverages pattern recognition, a key feature of human cognition. Nonetheless, it can lead to the neglect of base rate information and result in faulty judgments, a phenomenon often referred to as base rate neglect. Anchoring and adjustment is another commonly employed heuristic, wherein individuals start with an initial reference point, the anchor, and make adjustments to arrive at a final estimate. The anchor might be a known fact, an arbitrary number, or a suggested value, and it can significantly influence decisions, even if it is irrelevant to the task at hand. For example, when asked to estimate the population of a city, people will provide different answers depending on whether they were first exposed to a high or low number, even if that number has no factual basis. This heuristic reveals how susceptible we are to contextual cues and highlights the cognitive inertia inherent in human judgment. While these heuristics can lead to cognitive biases, it is important not to view them merely as flaws in human reasoning. Rather, they should be understood as adaptive tools that have evolved to help us manage complexity and make decisions with limited resources. In real-world situations where exhaustive analysis is impractical, heuristics often yield fast and frugal solutions that are good enough. Kierkegaard and his colleagues have been especially influential in reframing heuristics as exploit the structure of specific environments. For example, the recognition heuristic suggests that if one of two objects is recognized and the other is not, people will infer that the recognized object has the higher value on some criterion. In many cases, such as predicting which of two cities has a larger population, this heuristic performs remarkably well. Beyond psychology, heuristics have found extensive application in artificial intelligence and computer science. In these domains, heuristics are used to guide search algorithms, reduce computational load, and find approximate solutions to complex problems. A classic example is the @search algorithm, which uses heuristics to efficiently navigate through problem spaces in areas such as pathfinding and game development. Heuristics are also central to machine learning, where models often rely on heuristic optimization methods like gradient descent to iteratively improve performance. In business and economics, heuristics are employed to model consumer behavior, pricing strategies, and financial decision-making. Behavioral economists have integrated heuristics into their frameworks to explain anomalies that classical models fail to account for, such as why people exhibit loss aversion or why markets experience bubbles. The incorporation of heuristics into economic models has led to more nuanced and realistic representations of human behavior, which in turn has influenced policy design in areas such as retirement planning, healthcare, and education. Heuristics also play a vital role in expertise and intuition. Experienced professionals, such as doctors, firefighters, and chess grandmasters, often rely on heuristics to make rapid and accurate decisions. These heuristics are honed through years of practice and feedback, allowing experts to recognize patterns and respond appropriately without conscious deliberation. While such intuitive decision-making can be susceptible to error, especially in unfamiliar or deceptive contexts, it often outperforms more deliberate forms of analysis in high-stakes environments where time is critical. Nevertheless, the use of heuristics is not without its challenges. One major issue is the difficulty in distinguishing between situations where heuristics will lead to accurate judgments and those where they will not. This uncertainty is compounded by the fact that many heuristics operate below the level of conscious awareness, making them difficult to detect and correct. Debiasing strategies, such as encouraging individuals to consider alternative hypotheses, slow down their thinking, or use checklists, can sometimes mitigate the negative effects of heuristics. However, these interventions are not universally effective and may not always be feasible in real-world settings. In conclusion, heuristics are indispensable tools of thought that reflect the adaptive nature of human cognition. They enable us to navigate a world full of ambiguity, uncertainty, and complexity with remarkable efficiency. While they can sometimes lead us astray, their value lies in their ability to provide workable solutions when optimality is out of reach. Understanding heuristics, how they function, when they succeed, and why they fail, is essential not only for psychology, but for any field concerned with decision-making under constraint. As research continues to evolve, a more nuanced appreciation of heuristics will likely yield deeper insights into both the strengths and limitations of the human mind. Forgetting and memory decay are fundamental aspects of human cognition, essential to understanding not only how we retain information, but also how and why we lose it over time. These processes have been central to psychological and neuroscientific inquiry for over a century, offering insight into the dynamics of memory systems, the limitations of mental storage, and the adaptive functions of memory loss. Although often perceived negatively, forgetting is not merely a failure of memory, but rather an active and sometimes beneficial process that plays a crucial role in maintaining cognitive efficiency and psychological health. Memory decay, in particular, refers to the gradual loss of memory traces over time, and it constitutes one of the primary mechanisms underlying forgetting. Together, these phenomena form an essential counterbalance for learning and memory consolidation, shaping the way we interact with and make sense of the vast amount of information encountered throughout our lives. The scientific study of forgetting dates back to the pioneering work of Hermann Ebbinghaus in the late 19th century. Ebbinghaus conducted controlled experiments on himself to measure the rate at which learned nonsense syllables were forgotten over time. From this work emerged the famous forgetting curve, which illustrates how memory retention declines exponentially shortly after learning but levels off over time. Its findings suggested that memory loss is most rapid within the first few hours or days, with a slower, more gradual decay occurring thereafter. This early model laid the groundwork for subsequent theories, many of which have proposed various mechanisms for forgetting, such as decay, interference, retrieval failure, and motivated forgetting. Among these, memory decay theory posits that memory traces, representations of learned information, fade or deteriorate over time due to disuse, similar to how a physical object might erode or degrade without maintenance. However, memory decay alone cannot fully account for the complexity of forgetting. For example, interference theory asserts that forgetting occurs because other memories compete with and disrupt the retrieval of target information. This competition can take the form of proactive interference, where old memories inhibit the acquisition of new ones, or retroactive interference, where new information impairs the recall of previously learned material. In daily life, this kind of interference is especially evident when similar pieces of information overlap, such as learning new phone numbers or passwords. Retrieval failure, another critical explanation, suggests that memories are not lost, but merely inaccessible due to the absence of appropriate cues. This view aligns with the encoding specificity principle, which states that recall is most effective when the context at retrieval matches the context at encoding. Neuroscientific research has provided deeper insights into the biological underpinnings of memory decay and forgetting. Memory formation and retention involve complex processes at the synaptic level, including long-term potentiation, LP, which strengthens the connections between neurons. Over time, if these neural pathways are not reactivated through recall or rehearsal, the strength of the synaptic connections may diminish, leading to memory decay. Furthermore, neurobiological studies have identified regions such as the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex as critical for memory consolidation and retrieval. Changes in these areas due to aging, trauma, or neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's disease can exacerbate memory decay, highlighting the interplay between physiological changes and cognitive decline. Interestingly, forgetting is not always detrimental. From an evolutionary perspective, it may serve several adaptive functions. Forgetting allows organisms to discard outdated or irrelevant information, thereby preventing cognitive overload and enabling more efficient decision-making. It also supports generalization by allowing us to abstract patterns from specific experiences, thus facilitating learning in novel situations. Moreover, certain forms of forgetting, such as motivated forgetting or repression, may play a role in emotional regulation by helping individuals to manage traumatic or distressing memory. Research in cognitive psychology has shown that individuals may actively inhibit the retrieval of unwanted memories through conscious strategies or unconscious processes, a phenomenon supported by findings in neuroimaging study activity in memory early brain regions during such efforts. Notably, the experience of forgetting can vary widely across individuals and contexts. Factors influencing memory retention and decay include the nature of the material, the depth of processing, emotional salience, the frequency and spacing of retrieval, and individual differences in cognitive abilities. Spaced repetition has been demonstrated to significantly enhance long-term retention by countering the effects of decay through strategically timed review. Similarly, emotionally charged events tend to be remembered more vividly and durably, likely due to the modulatory role of the amygdala in memory consolidation. On the other hand, stress and anxiety can impair both encoding and retrieval processes, leading to increased forgetting. Contemporary research continues to explore innovative approaches to mitigate unwanted forgetting and harness memory decay constructively. Cognitive interventions such as mnemonic devices, retrieval practice, and context reinstatement have proven effective in enhancing memory performance. Advances in pharmacology and neurostimulation techniques also offer promising avenues for memory enhancement and the treatment of memory disorders. However, these developments raise ethical questions regarding the desirability and potential consequences of altering memory processes, particularly in relation to identity, authenticity, and emotional well-being. In summary, forgetting and memory decay are intricate phenomena shaped by a confluence of psychological, biological, and environmental factors. Rather than mere lapses or flaws in cognition, they reflect essential mechanisms that balance the human mind's need for stability and flexibility. Understanding these processes not only sheds light on the limitations of memory, but also reveals the adaptive strategies that underlie human learning and behavior. As research continues to unravel the intricacies of memory dynamics, it holds the potential to inform educational practices, clinical interventions, and a broader understanding of the human experience. False memories, though seemingly a mere cognitive curiosity, delve deep into the architecture of human memory, illustrating the fragile, reconstructive, and suggestible nature of how we recall past experiences. At its core, a false memory is a recollection of an event that either did not occur at all or occurred differently from how it is remembered. These memories feel as vivid, detailed, and emotionally charged as true ones, making them particularly insidious. For the well-educated mind, understanding the phenomenon of false memory necessitates an exploration of cognitive psychology, neuroscience, and even legal and social implications. Unlike a simple error in memory recall, such as forgetting a name or misplacing keys, false memories are constructed recollections, often formed through subtle suggestion, associative thinking, or misattribution. Research in cognitive psychology has shown that memory is not a fixed, immutable recording of events, but rather a dynamic process that is continuously reconstructed every time we access it. Each act of retrieval modifies the memory, potentially incorporating new elements, associations, or even errors into the original trace. Elizabeth Loftus, a pioneering psychologist in the study of false memories, famously demonstrated the malleability of memory through experiments in which participants were led to believe they had experienced events that never actually happened. In one classic study, participants were shown videos of car accidents and then asked questions with subtly leading language. Those who heard the word smashed estimated higher speeds and more severe collisions than those who heard hit. Thus phrasing could influence memory, but also influence our recollections are post-vivid information. Loftus further expanded this research by implanting entirely fictitious memories, such as being lost in a shopping mall as a child, into participants' minds through familial corroboration and repeated suggestion. These experiments underscored how social cues, authority figures, and repeated storytelling can seed and solidify false narratives within one's memory bank. The underlying mechanisms that facilitate false memories involve both the encoding and retrieval stages of memory. Encoding, while information is initially processed and stored, can be influenced by attention, emotion, and context. For instance, during highly stressful or emotionally charged events, individuals may focus intensely on central details at the expense of peripheral ones, resulting in a fragmented or distorted memory. Over time, as these gaps are filled in with plausible yet inaccurate information, often drawn from media, conversations, or imagination, a coherent but erroneous narrative can emerge. At the retrieval stage, the brain does not replay a memory like a video, but reconstructs it using various sources of information, including semantic knowledge, schema, and expectations. This reconstructive process, while efficient, is vulnerable to contamination. Neuroscientific studies using functional MO have shown that true and false memories activate similar brain regions, particularly in the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex, which may explain why false memories can feel as real as accurate ones. From a developmental perspective, children and adults are particularly susceptible to forming false memories due to differences in cognitive control and source monitoring ability. Children's imaginative capacities and their deference to authority figures make them prone to suggestion, while older adults may have diminished capacity to distinguish between internally generated thoughts and externally derived events. However, false memory is not confined to age. It is a universal cognitive phenomenon, exacerbated by a certain psychological condition. For instance, individuals with high levels of dissociation or fantasy proneness may be more likely to construct vivid false memories. Similarly, people suffering from PTSD or depression might reconstruct their pasts in ways that align with their emotional states, sometimes fabricating events that match their inner turmoil or explanatory needs. False memories have significant implications beyond the realm of psychology, particularly in the legal system. Eyewitness testimony, often treated as gold standard evidence in courtrooms, is vulnerable to distortion through police questioning techniques, media exposure, and attorney suggestions. Misidentifications and erroneous recollections have contributed to numerous wrongful convictions, as confirmed by DNA exoneration cases. The Innocence Project, for instance, has documented how faulty memories were a leading cause in wrongful convictions overturned by DNA evidence. In therapeutic settings, controversies have emerged over recovered memories, but patients, often under hypnosis or guided imagery, recall previously forgotten traumatic events. Critics argue that such practices can lead to the creation of false memories, especially of childhood abuse, which can have devastating consequences for families and communities. The debate underscores the ethical responsibility of professionals who work with memory to be aware. In the digital age, false memories may be proliferating more rapidly through social media and misinformation. The Mandela effect, where large groups of people share the same inaccurate memory, such as remembering Berenstain Bears as Berenstein, illustrates how collective memory can be shaped and distorted. The rapid spread of images, memes, and fake news can blur the line between fiction and fact, embedding false memories into the collective consciousness. Moreover, algorithms that reinforce echo chambers can lead individuals to repeatedly encounter the same misinformation, thereby solidifying false beliefs through the mere exposure effect. Yet, it is essential to note that not all false memories are detrimental. In some cases, they may serve adaptive function, constructing a positive narrative of the self, even if slightly inaccurate, can bolster mental health and resilience. Memory biases, such as the positivity effect, where people tend to remember past events more favorably, can help maintain psychological well-being. This suggests that while memory inaccuracy can be dangerous in forensic or historical context, it may also be a byproduct of an evolved cognitive system that prioritizes meaning and coherence over factual precision. In sum, false memories reveal the deeply constructive nature of human cognition. They highlight our brain's remarkable, albeit imperfect, capacity to create coherent narratives from fragmented experiences. As such, they challenge the lay belief in memory as a literal recording device and invite a more nuanced appreciation of its limitations and strengths. Understanding false memories not only has profound implications for psychology, neuroscience, and law, but also offers insights into human nature, how we perceive ourselves, relate to others, and make sense of our lives. While efforts to reduce memory distortion through cognitive interviewing techniques, judicial reforms, or educational interventions are important, it is equally crucial to foster public awareness about the malleability of memory. Only then can we approach personal recollections and shared histories with the humility and critical scrutiny they deserve. Executive function refers to a set of cognitive processes that enable individuals to plan, initiate, monitor, and adapt their behavior in response to changing goals and environment. These higher-order functions are central to our ability to live independently, manage time, regulate emotions, solve problems, and pursue long-term goals. Executive functions are largely mediated by the prefrontal cortex, a brain region that continues to develop into early adulthood, underscoring the evolutionary significance and complexity of these capabilities. While the term executive function may seem abstract, its real-world implications are profound, shaping academic achievement, occupational performance, social relationships, and mental health. Cognitive scientists often categorize executive functions into three core domains: working memory, inhibitory control, and cognitive flexibility. Working memory allows us to hold and manipulate information temporarily, such as remembering a phone number long enough to dial it or mentally rearranging a schedule to accommodate new tasks. Inhibitory control involves the ability to suppress automatic or dominant responses in favor of goal-directed ones, resisting the urge to check social media while working on a deadline. Cognitive flexibility, on the other hand, permits us to shift perspectives or strategies when faced with new information or changing rules, a skill essential for adapting to novel situations and solving complex problems. These core domains operate in concert. For instance, solving a math problem requires holding intermediate steps in working memory, inhibiting distractions, and adjusting strategies if the initial approach proves ineffective. Beyond these core functions, researchers also identify higher-order executive skills like planning, goal setting, self-monitoring, and decision-making. These capabilities emerge gradually over the course of development and are influenced by a dynamic interplay of genetic, neurobiological, and environmental factors. From a neuroanatomical standpoint, the prefrontal cortex is the command center for executive function. Within this region, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is crucial for working memory and planning, while the ventromedial and orbitofrontal regions are implicated in emotional regulation and decision-making. The anterior cingulate cortex, which monitors conflict and error, plays a pivotal role in self-regulation. These areas are densely interconnected with subcortical structures like the basal ganglia and limbic system, forming circuits that integrate motivation, reward, and executive control. Developmentally, executive functions show a prolonged trajectory. In early childhood, rudimentary forms of inhibition and working memory begin to appear, but these skills are fragile and easily disrupted. By middle childhood, children become increasingly capable of organizing tasks, switching attention, and resisting distractions, skills vital for academic learning. Adolescence is marked by continued refinement, with gains in metacognition and long-term planning. Notably, executive functions are among the last cognitive abilities to mature, often continuing to develop well into the third decade of life. Individual differences in executive function are substantial and have significant implication. Children with strong executive skills tend to perform better academically and socially. Conversely, deficits in executive function are hallmark features of several neurodevelopmental disorders, including attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADH, autism spectrum disorder, ASD, and specific learning disabilities. In ADHO example, impairments in inhibitory control and working memory are frequently observed, leading to difficulties in sustaining attention, following instructions, and regulating impulses. In adults, executive dysfunction can arise from various sources, including traumatic brain injury, stroke, neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and psychiatric conditions like schizophrenia and depression. In these contexts, impairments in planning, decision-making, or self-monitoring can severely compromise daily functioning. Understanding executive function is thus not only a matter of academic interest, but also of clinical urgency. Research has increasingly emphasized the plasticity of executive functions, revealing that these skills can be trained and improved across the lifespan. Interventions range from cognitive training programs, often involving computer-based tasks designed to challenge working memory or attentional control, to broader lifestyle approaches involving physical exercise, mindfulness, and structured routines. For children, enriched educational environments that encourage self-regulation, problem-solving, and autonomy are particularly beneficial. Similarly, adults benefit from goal-setting frameworks, external aids like planners and reminders, and behavioral strategies that scaffold executive processes. In educational settings, fostering executive function is increasingly recognized as critical for student success. Traditional curricula often emphasize rote learning and factual recall, but there is growing advocacy for incorporating activities that promote planning, collaboration, and reflective thinking. Classroom practices that encourage goal setting, self-assessment, and adaptive learning have been shown to enhance both executive skills and academic outcomes. Importantly, such interventions are most effective when they are embedded within meaningful, emotionally engaging contexts rather than isolated skill drill. In the realm of public policy and developmental psychology, executive function is a key predictor of life outcome, often surpassing equine academic achievement, employment stability, and health behaviors. Longitudinal studies, such as those by Moffat et al. 2011, have demonstrated that early childhood executive function predicts a range of adult life outcomes, including criminal behavior, substance use, and financial planning. These findings underscore the value of early interventions and the importance of viewing executive function not merely as a cognitive asset, but as a foundational capacity for lifelong competence and well-being. Despite substantial progress, challenges remain in the conceptualization and measurement of executive function. The term encompasses a broad constellation of skills that are difficult to isolate or assess uniformly. Tasks designed to measure one component often tap into others, leading to debates about the specificity and generalizability of findings. Moreover, executive function is influenced by context, motivation, and stress, factors that complicate experimental control and interpretation. Emerging research is exploring biomarkers, such as neuroimaging and physiological indices, to provide more objective assessments. Executive function also intersects with broader philosophical and societal questions about autonomy, responsibility, and human potential. The ability to set goals, resist temptations, and act in accordance with values is central to moral agency. When individuals struggle with executive control due to neurological or psychological conditions, the implications extend beyond personal functioning to legal, ethical, and policy domains. As neuroscience continues to reveal the malleability and complexity of executive processes, there is an increasing need for interdisciplinary dialogue that bridges cognitive science, education, mental health, and social policy. In conclusion, executive function represents the cognitive architecture that enables goal-directed behavior, self-regulation, and adaptive problem solving. Rooted in the prefrontal cortex and shaped by a constellation of biological and environmental influences, these skills are essential for navigating the complexities of modern life. Whether supporting a child's academic growth, aiding recovery after brain injury, or informing strategies for aging populations, a deep understanding of executive function offers a powerful lens through which to improve individual outcome. Episodic memory, a cornerstone of human cognition, enables individuals to recall specific events situated in time and space, encompassing the rich tapestry of personal experiences that define one's life narrative. Distinguished from semantic memory, which pertains to general knowledge devoid of temporal context, episodic memory is inherently autobiographical, allowing for the mental re-experiencing of past events and detail. This form of memory is not merely a passive repository, but an active, reconstructive process involving a complex interplay of neural structures. Central to this process is the hippocampus, located in the medial temporal lobe, which integrates multimodal sensory information to form cohesive memory traces. The prefrontal cortex collaborates in organizing and retrieving these memories, ensuring their accessibility when needed. The amygdala, known for its role in emotion processing, enhances the encoding of emotionally charged events, thereby increasing their memorability. Additionally, the parietal cortex contributes spatial context, situating memories within a tangible framework. The retrieval of episodic memories is influenced by cues that trigger the reactivation of neural pathways associated with the original experience, with emotional valence playing a significant role in the vividness and clarity of recall. Episodic memory serves not only as a record of past experiences, but also as a foundation for future-oriented thinking. The ability to imagine or simulate potential future scenarios, known as episodic future thinking, relies on the same neural mechanisms as recalling past events. This capacity allows individuals to anticipate outcomes, make informed decisions, and plan effectively. However, episodic memory is susceptible to decline with aging and in various neurological conditions. Age-related changes in the prefrontal cortex and hippocampus can impair the retrieval of episodic details, while diseases like Alzheimer's disrupt the neural networks essential for memory consolidation and recall. Despite these challenges, strategies such as engaging in meaningful conversations, creating associations, and focusing on unique aspects of experiences can bolster episodic memory. Understanding the intricacies of episodic memory not only sheds light on the human experience, but also informs approaches to mitigate memory decline and enhance cognitive health.